All right, let's take it to Southern California now, which is hit by a 5.2 earthquake. Video from the San Diego Zoo Safari Park shows elephants making what experts call an alert circle. They say it is a natural received response to threats to protect the herd. The quake was also felt as far away as Los Angeles and over the border into Mexico. The good news, no reports so far of significant damage or injuries. Officials say a quake like this is always a good reminder to stay prepared and to have a disaster plan. Never hurts to have a plan.
We begin here in the United States, where President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs, which are targeting most of the world, are now hitting Americans where it hurts the most, in their pocketbooks. From tea and coffee to apparel, shoppers in the United States are expected to see a price hike on everyday essentials. And very soon, the next thing added to their woes will be tomatoes. The Trump administration is planning to slap a nearly 21% tariff on most of the tomatoes imported from Mexico. The tariff will be imposed in mid-July, near the start of peak tomato season. And in a statement, the Department of Commerce said it intends to withdraw from the free trade agreement from Mexico. The deal, signed back in 2019, had averted any anti-dumping duties on Mexican tomatoes and ended a tariff dispute between the two nations. However, U.S. authorities now say Mexican tomatoes are unfairly priced, and such an agreement has failed to protect domestic tomato growers.
The current agreement has failed to protect U.S. tomato growers from unfairly priced Mexican imports, as commerce has been flooded with comments from them urging its termination. This action will allow U.S. tomato growers to compete fairly in the marketplace. With the termination of this agreement, Commerce will institute an anti-dumping duty order on July 14, 2025, resulting in duties of 20.91% on most imports of tomatoes from Mexico.
Now the upcoming tariff will pile onto the existing blanket tariff of 25% on Mexico's automotive, steel, and aluminum sectors. The analysts say the federal government will drive up prices of tomatoes in the United States.
It is astonishing that the Trump administration is intentionally trying to make tomatoes more expensive. President Trump won the 2024 election in large part because groceries were expensive. Who wants this policy? What share of voters want tomatoes to be more expensive?
Notably, Mexico's tomato production is year-round, making it the largest open field and shade house tomato producer. Mexico's exports over 80% of its tomatoes to the United States and is the biggest source of American farm imports. In fact, back in 2023, Washington imported tomatoes worth more than $2.7 billion. Mexico also fulfills 25% of the global demand of tomatoes, making it the 8th largest producer worldwide.
China has responded in Donald Trump's trade war, halting orders of Boeing aircrafts. Let's go live to 9 US correspondent Jonathan Kersley in LA. Jono, good morning to you. Has the president responded again?
Yes, he has, and directly, essentially saying to the American people and to the world that when it comes to any sort of trade deal, the ball is in China's court, and that America has the one thing China wants, that is American consumers and American cash. The tit-for-tat escalation just continues. The president taking to Truth Social earlier today to say that China had reneged at least on a deal with Boeing to take stock of fully committed to aircraft. That has sent Boeing's share price falling a little bit on Wall Street this morning. But the United States had also paused orders from small businesses in China. Donald Trump has slapped Chinese imports with 145% tariffs as this trade war escalates. But speaking from the White House podium today, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt issued this message she said had just come directly from Donald Trump in the Oval Office.
The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger. And China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer. Or to put it another way, they need our money.
The White House is still insisting that there are dozens of countries trying to stitch up trade deals to avoid the types of tariffs we have seen now imposed for round about a month or so. Among the parties doing negotiations with the United States, the European Union, that bloc of 27 nations, has essentially said if it does not strike a trade deal with the United States, then they can expect to see tariffs on things like toilet paper, soybeans and eye makeup.
Citrus Doll. a small Western Cape town that gets its name from its most famous export. The oranges, satsumas and mandarins planted on these hills and valleys are destined for the United States. But farmers here, like Gerrit van der Merwe, are now facing uncertain times thanks to Donald Trump. The US administration announced a 31% tariff on South African goods. The tariffs have been put on hold for 3 months after a violent reaction from the stock markets. But farmers don't know what might come next.
The whole community, the workers, the pickers, it's just a lot of anxiety around. Nobody knows what's going on. They're looking at the leaders of the community to help us solve the problem. But for now, it's uncertainty, and in any uncertain environment, business doesn't thrive.
The Trump administration says it's ready to negotiate with different countries, and Van der Merwe believes South African farmers are in a strong position.
We farm a citrus out of season out of California, so we're not competition. We're only complementary to the Californian side. For the American consumer, we will provide them with cheaper fresh fruit and vegetables on a yearly basis. And then surely that's a net positive for the US consumer.
This packaging plant will kick into high gear in just a few weeks, preparing fruit to be shipped to the US. 7 million cartons of fruit leave the Citrusdal area each year, destined for the US market. It's a $98 million industry which supports thousands of seasonal and permanent workers. And so the Trump tariffs are really a bread and butter issue here, with farmers worried about how they'll keep their businesses alive and workers concerned about how they'll feed their families. The uncertainty created by the Trump administration has left line manager Shimonli Matala worried. In peak season, she oversees 160 workers, many who support large families with their income.
I'm supporting my family of 9 in the house with my money that I made here every month. So yes, it's pretty important to me that we export to the USA. When we pack to the USA, that's where the overtime comes in. And when the overtime comes in, that's where you make more money.
The mayor of the region, which includes Citrusdal, is Dr. Ruben Richards. He's also a farmer and says the South African government should take a non-political approach when negotiating with Trump.
Donald Trump is not a politician. He's a business person. And a business person must engage with another business person to make a deal.
The South African government has said it will support farmers by reaching out to other markets like China, the Middle East and Europe. But farmers here say changing industries is a slow and difficult process. They believe that the priority should be negotiating a deal that will get these boxes to US shores at a price that will keep the workers employed.
Welcome back. The Trump administration is freezing billions of dollars in funding to Harvard University after rejecting the school's demands.
Peyton Kennedy is at the WKRN.com alert desk now with that late night update. Peyton, good morning.
Good morning. And Harvard is asking that a federal judge block President Trump's efforts here. The Trump administration had demanded that Harvard end its DEI programs, adopt merit-based admissions, cooperate with immigration authorities, and stop recognizing some student clubs or risk losing funding. Now, this is the first time a major university has pushed back against the funding threat. The university's president says this is a violation of the First Amendment, saying, quote, no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue, end quote. Monday night, it was announced that the government will withhold $2.2 billion in grants and $60 million in contracts to Harvard. And remember,
Parliament has passed a controversial amendment bill that puts restrictions on LGBTQ+ community. This has drawn sharp criticism from human rights groups and members of the community. As Parliament was voting on the amendment, several protesters tried to block the Parliament building in defiance. The fresh changes in Hungary's constitution will give a legal backing to the law banning public display of homosexuality and pride parades. The constitutional amendment makes provisions to ban all public LGBTQ plus events. It denies recognition to LGBTQ plus community and puts restrictions on homosexual education and social media content. The fresh constitution amendment also proposes to revoke citizenship of dual nationals. This move comes ahead of the national elections next year. Orban is vying for the fresh term based on his traditional nationalist vote bank. Meanwhile, opposition parties are accusing him of dismantling democracy and rule of law.
Past 15 years, step by step, they have been dismantling democracy and the rule of law. And in the past 2-3 months, we see that this process has been sped up. And since the election is coming up next year, it's going to be within a year, they will do everything in their power to stay in power. That is what this constitutional amendment is about.
Protesters have flocked the streets of Budapest since the parliament passed the earlier legislation banning Pride Parade. The European Union has also lambasted Orban. The bloc has accused Hungarian Prime Minister of restricting the freedom of the media and the rule of law in Hungary.
The president of El Salvador visited the White House today. The visit comes as the White House says a Maryland man was mistakenly deported and sent to a maximum security prison in El Salvador. KCAU 9 Washington correspondent Basil John has an update.
The Trump administration says it's not up to them to bring that Maryland father home. They say the Supreme Court only ordered them to facilitate his return, but ultimately it's up to El Salvador.
We have millions of people that should not be in this country that are dangerous.
President Donald Trump thanked the president of El Salvador for taking in hundreds of suspected gang members.
As many as we can get out of our country.
President Trump hosted the president, Nayib Bukele, at the White House. Bukele committed to aiding the U.S.
To liberate 350 million people, you have to imprison some.
Since March, El Salvador accepted from the U.S. more than 200 Venezuelan immigrants accused of gang activity and other crimes.
You know that you have a crime problem, a terrorism problem that you need help with.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration is pushing back as a U.S. district judge is considering whether to force the government to explain why it shouldn't be held in contempt in Kilmer Abrigo Garcia's case. He is the Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador last month.
It was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him.
How can I return him to the United States? Like I smuggle him into the United States or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it.
The state and Garcia's family are continuing their efforts to get him back home.
Our government has the ability to make it right. And so we ask, we beg, we pray that we bring Kilmer home. Bring Kilmer home. Bring Kilmer home. Bring Kilmer home.
The White House previously said that Garcia's case was an administrative error, but is standing by its claim that he was a part of the MS-13 gang.
For nearly 60 years, Cuban migrants received special privileges to immigrate to the United States as they fled political persecution. Now they're in jeopardy, with the Trump administration targeting them as mass deportation efforts continue. Since 1966, Cubans were allowed in the U.S. for permanent residency far quicker than most other nationalities, free from quotas and other mandates, such as proving family or work-related reasons to immigrate under the Cuban Adjustment Act. Ever since, Cubans fleeing the communist nation have been given fast-track status throughout Republican and Democratic administrations. Many Republicans are urging President Trump to keep protections for Cubans, cautioning against sending them back to the communist island where they may face deadly consequences, while blaming the Biden administration for the immigration problem. Cubans are a key voting bloc for Republicans, fueling President Trump to victory in Florida 3 times and helping propel him to the White House in 2016 and 2024. Immigration groups warn President Trump's end to immigration protections potentially puts hundreds of thousands of Cuban immigrants in the U.S. at risk of deportation. Many Cubans who came under older programs remain safe, but more than 110,000 who came under a temporary humanitarian parole program and hundreds of thousands more under release and recognize may be expelled from the U.S. Advocacy groups report more than 500,000 Cubans face deportation. While the Cuban Adjustment Act remains intact, its protections have changed over the years. The wet foot, dry foot policy of 1996 awarded any Cuban who reached U.S. soil protected status. President Obama abolished the policy in 2017, allowing only Cubans who were authorized to enter the U.S.
Let's talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been 5 years since the virus brought the entire world to a standstill. So are we prepared if another pandemic came our way? The answer might be yes.
We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
For the last 3 years, the World Health Organization has been trying to come up with a treaty, the Pandemic Treaty, one that will prepare the world better for the future. What is WHO's Pandemic Treaty? Will you and I be protected next time? And why is the US not part of it? I'm Ananya Datta, and this is Grey Zone. In late 2019, something strange started to happen in Wuhan, China. People were showing up at hospitals with a mysterious pneumonia that didn't match anything doctors had seen before. By December 31st, 2019, China alerted the World Health Organization about this unknown illness. The world did not lose sleep over it, yet. Mysterious viruses show up now and then. You'll be surprised to know how many of them have been detected just this year. There is Lassa fever in Nigeria, foot and mouth disease in Central Europe, Marburg virus in Tanzania. So the WHO continued to monitor what it now called the SARS coronavirus disease 2019. January 11 saw the first recorded death in China. The virus was now spreading fast. Flights were still operating, people were still traveling, and before long, the virus had jumped borders. It was only 3 months later the WHO declared COVID-19 a global pandemic, the first global pause in modern memory. The on and off pauses continued for the next 2 long years, the longest 2 years for many. COVID-19 hasn't vanished, but all of us have learned to live with it, thanks to the vaccines. But the world still counts the cost of it. Over 7 million people lost their lives, trillions in economic damage, and a generation forever marked by masks, quarantine, and Zoom calls. We don't know if there is another pandemic coming, but the WHO wants to be prepared if there is one in our future. About 3 years ago, the WHO and its members started discussing an agreement. They sat down with every single lesson they learned in the 2 years of the COVID pandemic and came up with this. There are a total of 37 articles. They are hoping negotiations will end today as a preliminary agreement has been reached. It starts with a promise. No one gets left behind. If a new virus emerges, vaccines and treatments won't just go to the highest bidder. This time, distribution will be fair, whether you live in Berlin or Bamako. The practical work begins in Chapter 2, where the world demands better defense. The agreement demands a watchful world. Countries must improve their surveillance systems and act on early signals. No more waiting for infections to snowball. Detection must be rapid and reporting transparent. This is something the WHO was constantly criticized for. The treaty also says we can't just focus on humans. This article pulls in the interconnectedness of animals, people, and the environment, because the next virus might be lurking in a forest, a farm, or a market we don't know. No more overworked, underprotected frontline workers. This article safeguards the people who safeguard us. Training, support, protection, and search capacity during crises. While all this sounds rosy, even without a pandemic, our healthcare sectors aren't taken care of. One of the main remaining sticking points have been Article 10 and 11. They deal with diversifying the production of vaccines and transfer technology for production of health products for pandemics. This is particularly important for developing countries. During the COVID-19 pandemic, poorer countries accused rich nations of hoarding vaccine doses and tests. Many countries with large pharmaceutical industries have meanwhile opposed the idea of mandatory tech transfers and have insisted on it being voluntary. Another remaining issue is language related to sanctions under Article 13. The text provides for the establishment of a global supply chain and logistics network to expand access to vaccines, treatments, and tests needed to fight pandemics. However, in discussions on Article 13, countries have yet to agree on granting unhindered access to health products outside of the pandemics or humanitarian contexts, which would allow countries under international sanctions to obtain things like vaccines, tests, and treatments. Negotiations had been scheduled to conclude last June, but were extended for a year in a bid to overcome disagreements. The 13th round of talks started last week as health agencies reeled from drastic foreign aid cuts by the United States. The US was the world's donor superpower until Donald Trump entered the White House. On his very first day in office, he decided to withdraw from the WHO. Washington has not taken part in the latest negotiations. Right-wing commentators in the country say that the move could undermine national sovereignty by giving too much power to a UN agency. The WHO has rejected such assertions. The pandemic treaty is not perfect. It's messy, ambitious, and still unfinished. But at its core, it's an attempt, a global attempt, to do better in time, where established healthcares like the US, UK, and India don't fall apart. Developing countries don't have to wait in line for critical medications. And the worst hit, poor countries, aren't left stranded to fend on their own. The US's absence from the treaty speaks volume. It's not like trade where countries find alternatives. The US has unmatched scientific infrastructure, global influence, and resources that it is not willing to share, all because of power. But viruses don't care about borders and power. Maybe it's time our politics stop pretending they do.
It's a practice normally reserved for diplomats in Russia and China. The European Commission is giving burner phones and laptops to its staff members coming to the United States. According to a report in the Financial Times, commissioners and senior officials coming to Washington, D.C. next week for the International Monetary Fund and World Bank spring meetings were given the new guidance out of concern their standard IT kit could be susceptible to surveillance. One EU official told the FT they are worried about the U.S. getting into the Commission systems. In addition to the burner devices for work, they're being told to turn off their personal devices while in the country and place them in a special sleeve that prevents spying when left unattended. In a statement, the Commission confirmed to the outlet that it had updated its security advice for the United States, but no specific instructions regarding burner devices were put in writing. The U.S. and EU are trying to come to an agreement on tariffs before they both impose retaliatory measures. President Trump placed a 20% reciprocal tariff on the EU, but lowered it to 10% for 90 days so they could try to reach a deal. The EU did the same, suspending its 25% tariff on $21 billion worth of U.S. exports until mid-July. Top EU commissioners have been meeting with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer in an attempt to make a deal. It's unclear how much progress they've made. As per the burner phones, this isn't the first time the U.S. has been accused of this type of espionage. In 2013, German Chancellor Angela Merkel called out President Obama after she discovered the United States may have spied on her mobile phone. The allegations were made after contractor Edward Snowden leaked information to the public regarding spying operations at the National Security Agency. Eventually, President Obama publicly apologized and said he'd work to restore the confidence of U.S. allies who were revealed to be targeted.
Explosions rocked the night sky, firefighters battled raging fires, civilians fled in terror. This is becoming an everyday thing in Sana'a, Yemen's capital. This is the devastating aftermath. Firefighters battling flames at a ceramics factory, people rushing to aid the injured, rubble strewn on the streets. The Houthis claim 7 people were killed in the latest strikes, with 29 others injured. The US has been targeting Houthi positions west of Sana'a. The campaign, codenamed Operation Rough Rider, is intensifying by the day. The U.S. military's Central Command released footage of ammunition being readied for more strikes. The latest strikes come a day after Houthis' daring missile attack. The Houthis claim one of the missiles targeted the Sderot Mika Air Base, where, according to reports, Israel holds nuclear-capable Jericho missiles. While the other missile was aimed at Ben Gurion Airport, Israel's air defenses intercepted one missile. The second reportedly fell short, mirroring previous Houthi attempts. The U.S. campaign, which began on March 15th, has already claimed over 120 lives, according to Houthi health authorities. The strikes have targeted radar systems, air defenses and ballistic missile launch sites, aiming to cripple the Houthis' ability to attack commercial vessels and naval assets in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. The Houthis, despite the one-month-long area attack by the U.S., remain a potent fighting force. The Iran-backed rebels have now claimed to have shot down another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone, marking the fourth such incident. The Trump administration has emphasized the necessity of these strikes to deter Houthi aggression and protect international shipping lanes. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stated that the U.S. is prepared to escalate operations if required to prevent further threats. The attacks on Houthis is also seen as a tool to deter its backer Iran. These strikes come at a time when Washington and Tehran are holding talks on Saturday. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and U.S. Middle East Special Envoy Steve Witkoff held a first round of talks via Omani mediation in Muscat. This was the highest level Iran-U.S. nuclear negotiations since the collapse of a 2015 accord. Now, the next round of indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran over Tehran's nuclear program will be held in Rome. France welcomed the ongoing indirect talks but insisted Europe would be vigilant in its security concerns, or if its security concerns were taken into account.
Well, it's not exactly sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads, but Ukraine is showing the world a new kind of weapon, one that could change how it defends against drones and missiles. Using a joystick, the weapon's operator locks onto enemy drones and takes them out with directed energy, in this case, laser power, which means it doesn't fire any bullets. Ukraine unveiled its first homegrown laser system capable of shooting down drones, aircraft, and even missiles last year. But now the country is publicly showcasing the system. It's called Trezub, Ukrainian for Trident, and it was at a defense industry conference in Europe. Footage released by the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Vadim Sukharevsky, showed the laser in action during testing. Operators manually steered the system using a joystick, targeting ground objects and disabling a drone's onboard camera through directed energy. Sukharevsky says the laser can destroy drones, guided bombs, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at distances up to 3 kilometers. The Trezub can also engage helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft at 5 kilometers. In a separate mode, it can blind optical sensors at up to 10 kilometers. The system is still considered a prototype, but officials say automatic tracking could be added in future versions. While current footage shows it mounted on the ground, Ukraine says it may eventually deploy the laser on drones or mobile platforms. Of course, figuring out a way to power the system on a drone is going to be an obvious challenge, but a tethered drone could be one option. When Ukraine first confirmed laser weapons testing late last year, Sukharevsky said the country was joining a small group of nations capable of using lasers to down aircraft. He also said future air defense teams might replace some conventional weapons with lasers, giving them better tools to intercept drones. While full tactical details remain classified, analysts say directed energy weapons like lasers could offer a more affordable way to counter drone swarms, one of Ukraine's most frequent threats in its war with Russia. For more of our...
Monday's attack comes exactly 1 week after another raid claimed 52 lives. Gunmen suspected to be cattle rustlers raided 2 villages in Plateau State's Bassa district before shooting and hacking their victims. Dozens more were injured. A resident interviewed by Reuters said a mass burial was conducted for the victims. Plateau, in Nigeria's center, is one of the country's most ethnically diverse states. Intercommunal fights pitting mostly Christian farmers and predominantly Muslim herders are common. Amnesty International said the gunmen also destroyed and looted homes. In a statement, the organization blamed inexcusable security failures for Monday's attack.
After 2 years of war, destruction is everywhere in Sudan. But beyond the bombed buildings and debris-filled streets, the country is facing another problem: the risk of a devastating famine. Nearly 25 million people currently experience extreme hunger. They represent half the country's population.
2 years since the onset of the war, Sudan has now become the world's largest hunger crisis. Nearly half the population are acutely food insecure. Famine has taken hold in parts of Darfur and is spreading. In order to turn the tide, WFP needs access in order to reach people that have been isolated by the conflict, and we also need funding.
The severe cuts to humanitarian aid made by US President Donald Trump after taking office in January have also affected funds for the World Food Programme.
All these challenges are coming at a time when resources for humanitarian response globally are reducing. We know that it is not possible to stop a famine with food alone. You need healthcare, you need water, you need sanitation. So the whole response needs to be well supported in order to be able to turn this around and stem the tide of famine.
The situation is particularly dire in refugee camps such as Zamzam camp in North Darfur, the first place where famine was detected last August. The conflict has forced at least 13 million people to flee their homes.
Elsewhere, paramilitaries in Sudan killed more than 200 civilians over 2 days of attacks last week on refugee camps and around the city of Al-Fashir in the Darfur region. The UN said the Rapid Support Forces continued killing at 2 large camps in Zamzam and Abu Shuk, which protected as many as 700,000 displaced civilians. All 9 medical staff members of Relief International who were operating the clinic inside Zamzam camp were murdered. The civil war between the army and the paramilitary forces began almost 2 years ago and has seen tens of thousands killed and 12 million people displaced.
Russia launched one of its deadliest strikes on Ukraine's Sumy city, which is located just 25 kilometers away from Russian border. The Russian attacks on Ukraine's eastern front is a part of North Korea's elaborate plan to help Moscow in its war. Our next report decodes how North Korea is leaving no stone unturned to aid Russia.
North Korean soldiers joined Russia in its war against Ukraine last year. Together, the Russian and North Korean troops turned the tide on a Ukrainian incursion into Russia's western Kursk region. The Russians lacked armored vehicles and drone warfare experience, suffering heavy losses on the battleground. But Pyongyang quickly made up for its losses by sending over 14,000 troops. Not just the lives of its men, North Korea has been offering a lot more to Russia since the past 20 months. A Reuters investigation found North Korea shells have made their way to Ukraine's eastern front via sea and then by train. The flow of arms combined with North Korean manpower gave Russia a critical battlefield advantage.
It's fair to say that North Korea has stopped Russia from losing this war. North Korea's contribution has been strategically vital. North Korea's artillery shells are a strategic imperative. Without North Korean support, Vladimir Putin would fail in his war in Ukraine.
North Korea has dispatched ballistic missiles as well as long-range artillery and multiple launch rocket systems. Its deliveries mark direct military aid to Russia's war effort, which has also benefited from Iranian long-range drone technology and close economic support from China. A UK-based research organization tracked 64 shipments over 20 months, carrying nearly 16,000 containers and millions of artillery rounds for use against Ukraine, including a shipment as recent as March 17th. Though Western military support for Ukraine has kept it in the war, since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, the aid has been inconsistent and of late appears increasingly uncertain. At no point in the war did any Ukrainian ally offer its own soldiers to fight. By the start of this year, 4,000 North Korean soldiers had been killed or wounded fighting against Ukrainian forces since they first arrived in Kursk, and by February, North Korea sent 3,000 more men to battlefield. Ukrainian commanders fighting in the Kursk region confirmed that the reinforcements were better prepared. Amid Ukraine and its allies' claims, Russia and North Korea have neither denied nor accepted of fighting troops in Ukraine. Russia's recent victories at Kursk come at a time when U.S. President Donald Trump wants a quick end to the war.
I think the war is, for that war to have started, is an abuse of power. This country would have never allowed that war to have started if I were president. That war is a shame.
Kyiv, who had hoped to use Russian territory as a bargaining chip, only holds a tiny pocket of the Kursk region.
And now moving to the war in Europe, tensions between the United States and Ukraine have intensified as President Donald Trump blamed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for starting the ongoing conflict with Russia. On Monday, President Trump claimed that millions of people have died because of three leaders: Russian President Vladimir Putin, former President Joe Biden, and Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky.
But that's a war that should have never been allowed to start, and Biden could have stopped it, and Zelensky could have stopped it, and Putin should have never started it. Everybody's to blame.
The commander-in-chief's remarks came just days after a deadly Russian missile strike killed at least 35 people and injured 117 others in the Ukrainian city of Sumy. Now, while estimates confirm that hundreds of thousands of people have been killed or injured since Russia's full-scale invasion began back in February of 2022, President Trump insisted the death toll had reached millions.
You have millions of people dead. Millions of people dead because of three people. Let's say Putin number one, but let's say Biden, who had no idea what the hell he was doing, number two, and Zelensky. And all I can do is try and stop it.
And further taking aim at the Ukrainian leader, President Trump said Ukraine shouldn't have ever started the war with Russia because it is 20 times its size, and accused President Zelensky of always looking to obtain Western weapons.
You don't start a war against someone 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles.
Time and again, President Trump has expressed a desire to end the war. In fact, yesterday, the president reiterated his stance, stating he wants to stop the killing without offering further details.
All I can do is try and stop it. That's all I want to do. I want to stop the killing. And I think we're doing well in that regard. I think you'll have some very good proposals very soon.
Relations between President Trump and the Ukrainian president have remained tense since a heated public confrontation at the White House back in February. The commander-in-chief previously labeled Zelensky a quote-unquote dictator without elections and has often echoed Moscow's claims about Ukraine's role in the conflict. As both leaders stand firm in their positions, the world watches closely, and what comes next could reshape the future of Europe and, of course, of this 3-year war.
Suspected U.S. airstrikes around Yemen's capital Sana'a killed at least 7 people and wounded 29 overnight. Well, this according to the Houthis, who claimed shooting down another American MQ-9 Reaper drone. Well, according to casualty figure released by the Houthis Health Ministry, at least 120 have been killed in the month-long campaign of U.S. airstrikes targeting the rebel group over their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. Footage aired by the Houthis' Al Masirah satellite news channel showed firefighters spraying water on a raging fire they described as being sparked by the airstrikes. Well, this as the U.S. prepares for more attacks. The country's Central Command released a video that showed Navy sailors aboard the USS Carl Vinson readying weapons for the operation against the Houthis. The arrival of the USS Carl Vinson in the region bolsters ongoing preparations against the rebel group. Now, taking advantage of the operations that has degraded Houthis' capabilities, reports say that Yemeni militia are planning a ground offensive against the rebels. In a bid to take over at least part of the Red Sea coast, the group has controlled in the decade since they took over power in much of the country's northwest. Now, reports further say that UAE, which supports these factions, raised the plan with the American officials in the recent weeks. Under the plan being discussed, the local factions based in the country's south would deploy their forces up the Houthi-controlled western Yemen and try and seize the Red Sea port of Hodeidah. If successful, it would push the Houthis back from large parts of the coast from where they have launched attacks on ships transiting nearby waters. Now, capturing Hodeidah would be a major blow to the Houthis, depriving them of an economic lifeline while also cutting off their main route to receive arms from Iran. Tehran publicly denies that it supplies the Houthis with weapons, but United Nations inspectors have regularly traced these weapons shipments back to Iran. Now, U.S. backed the coalition of around a dozen Arab countries led by Saudi Arabia and the UAE against the Houthis during Yemen's long-running civil war. That conflict ended in the 2022 truce. However, reports claim that officials from Saudi Arabia have privately told Americans and Yemeni officials that they won't join to help a ground offensive in Yemen again, fearing the damaging ballistic missile and drone attacks the Houthis previously launched at Saudi cities. The Houthis have spent years stockpiling missiles. This includes ballistic missiles called Typhoon, a rebranded version of the Iranian Qadr missile. They also have Iranian Quds cruise missiles. Some of its variants have a range of 1,650 kilometers. The rebels previously used Quds 2 cruise missile against Abu Dhabi in 2021 and Saudi Arabia in 2020.
China's newest overseas base is officially open, although the People's Liberation Army Navy, the official name for China's maritime forces, refers to it as a joint logistics and training center. The new base is the Ream Naval Station in Cambodia, giving the PLAN quick access to the Gulf of Thailand, the Strait of Malacca, and the South China Sea. It's an area of the world where around $3.5 trillion worth of goods sail through every year. We've been following the development of the base for a couple of years now, so be sure to check out our past reporting on the Straight Arrow News app for more. Among the many upgrades at Ream since 2022, the Chinese built new troop barracks, dredged the harbor, and extended the pier. It can now accommodate ships up to 20,000 tons, which is bigger than anything Cambodia has in its fleet, but not so big as to accommodate China's aircraft carriers. Satellite imagery shows China essentially has a pair of corvettes forward deployed to Ream on a permanent basis. In early April, military leaders from China and Cambodia held a ceremony commemorating the start of official operations at the base. The Cambodian government says Ream will be jointly maintained by personnel from both countries, but that it would remain under Cambodian control and is open to ships from all friendly nations. But the U.S. Department of Defense is worried China may be granted favored status at the base, and given the PLAN's hostility towards the Philippines, Taiwan, Australia, and other U.S. allies in the region, that favored status could translate into China being able to hamper, stall, or outright thwart any U.S. or allied plans for the region, like maintaining free and fair trade on the open seas. China's military ambitions in the Indo-Pacific region do not stop in Cambodia. In addition to claiming large swaths of the South China Sea as its own, China is also busy building dozens of airports and seaports throughout the Pacific as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. China is even building militarized artificial islands in the Pacific, complete with runways and docks big enough to accommodate some of China's biggest warships. China claims all of these projects are for civilian purposes, but the DoD says the dual-use nature of the ports means they can easily be used by the military. Not to mention, many of the companies doing the actual work have strong ties to China's military. So while China says it's simply expanding its trade base and improving foreign relations in the region, the U.S. and its allies are readying their forces for a potential Pacific conflict.